just do a short sort of introduction, and then I'll hand over to you. But yeah, so good afternoon. I'm quite surprised it's afternoon. And welcome to our guest lecture from Quarry House Collective, and the second day, obviously, of our symposium, Rollback 21, Digital Futures Among an Earthly Land. And this is following on from our second portfolio presentation from Luke, who is also here, and Miles, which focused obviously on the human presence among our land. And moving on to obviously the meeting we're in now, I'll just do a short introduction for you guys, but obviously will not be presumptuous and let you two take over. But from my understanding, Quarry House Collective was founded after you did a group show at Fish Factory in Penryn in 2019. And a conversation for you derived from this around a shared interest in the poetics of sculpture, landscape and drawing. And you have key sort of relationships with the materiality of your artworks and space as well, and place and craft. So yes, I will hand over to you both, and yeah.
Thank you. That was a good intro. I'll just screen share to get up.
We're just half of Quarry House Collective today. So I'm Kat, and then this is Ellie. So the other two are not available today, so we'll just try and cover.
Well, it's lovely to have you anyway. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us. We figured out screen share.
Yeah, I think that should come up now. Is my screen being shared?
Yes, I can see it.
Brilliant.
Nice.
So yeah, just a little presentation to kind of introduce who we are, what we do, and kind of how we started as well. Because I feel like for us, it would have been really lovely to have a lecture at the end of uni, kind of talking about starting a group collective or how to kind of build connections and just get to know people,
like recent graduates and their paths and things. So
yeah. So a little bit about who we are. I mean, there's already a great intro from that, but yeah, we're based in the Quarry in Maeve, Trenoworth Quarry, or Trenoworth, however you want to say it. And our work is quite rooted in place. So being in a quarry really helps to have that kind of sort of traditional Cornish landscape from the granite and that kind of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite an important place for us throughout the last year or so, through people and communities and our own work. So it's a fitting place for a studio.
So a little bit about where we started. It was our final year of uni, and as you said, we started with the Fish Factory show, but that was quite early in 2019. No, 2020, wasn't it? Yeah, in the February of 2020. Yeah, like literally like a couple weeks before COVID kind of shut everything down. But it was a show. I initially, before we started any of this, booked the Fish Factory for a week because I was just like, I'm just going to get it, and I don't want it to like be booked out, so I'll just pay for it now without having anyone else there, but just to get it and do it. And then I think it was like a week later, I kind of went around and spoke to you all, and I had like a chat. There was 6 of us that did the show.
Yeah, 3 of us were in the same sort of studio at uni, so our work kind of had a bit of a conversation going already, and you could see it working together.
Yeah, and there's 2 other girls that was with us for the show who have just gone on to do like other things, but all our work, we realized, worked really well together. And then from then on, we kind of had this idea in our head of starting something, but didn't really come to fruition until we did the stone carving workshop with our mentor David. And me and Kat were kind of having a chat, and he mentioned something about a random old building in the quarry.
Yes, he works at Trenoworth Quarry as well as being a tutor at Falmouth Uni. So that's how the link to the quarry sort of first started. And then he first mentioned a building, and we got very excited that we could possibly have a studio after uni. And then we heard from Cultivator about funding for a graduate startup award through the uni, which we managed to get for the 4 of us for the quarry space. And basically they will then be able to pay our rent for a year to help us start up the studio and get our work going post uni and helps with like business planning and workshops and stuff.
Yeah, and during the kind of period between getting the cultivator grant and COVID happening, everything, there was a lot of delays in like studios, and we had a lot of stress with different studios. We have gone through about 3 or 4 different options for studios, and they've kind of fallen through because initially we were obviously moving into Quarry, and then there was a little bit of an issue with COVID and the Quarry shutting down and Tim potentially not being able to keep that plot of land. But then, so we kind of went through different studio options to try and find somewhere because we just wanted to get in somewhere and work together. And because we had the cultivator, it was kind of nice to know that it was paid for, so we didn't have to worry about how expensive the place was at that point in time or anything like that. But there's quite a long period in the summer where we just tend to go out and meet different artists as well in like a COVID safe way, which is one of the photos here is in Treminier Sculpture Gardens, which you might see from the building. But we went and met Sam Bassett, which was really lovely.
Yeah, just sort of having a lot of conversations and intangible sort of work, I guess. We're just talking about work and ideas and just building up a bit of our kind of thoughts for what we want to do, really, with the 4 of us and then our mentor David. We had lots of walks and sea swims and field meetings.
Yeah, David has kind of been like the sort of the glue that has held it together.
Brought us together, yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of facilitated a lot of the stuff we've done, like getting in touch with artists. And so it's really good if you were going to start a collective to kind of have that mentor or have someone who's already done that, because he had a sculpture collective, didn't he, when he was in his like 20s. And so he's been really helpful just to navigate how to go about this and how to get funding and how a collective actually works and how we can work alongside each other and still make our own work.
Yeah. Is that how you go?
Yeah.
Cool. There's some more pictures from some of our little field meetings and on the seashore in Penryn as well.
So the other 2 members of Quarry House.
Yeah, so on the left we've got Helena on the left, and Ellie, myself, and Amberly. Just a little bit of progress from our renovation of the Quarry studio. I've just been posting a few little glimpses of the process on our Instagram and trying to keep a little bit of a document of it as we go, because we're trying to transform the space from little mouldy old place full of leaves and exhaust pipes and like random stuff.
Yeah.
Some little glimpses of that.
And then in November and December, as it says in there, I don't know why I had to think about that, but we, because of the struggle with getting studios, we applied to a few different buildings because we didn't really want a typical studio, so we didn't automatically go towards Grey's Wharf or the Fish Factory or Crouchy, just because we're hoping to get some kind of disused space that we could kind of turn into this really cool like stone carving sculpture space. So it did take a long time to kind of go through different studios and keep getting kind of stressful. There was a lot of stressful situations with landlords and them not being happy with what we wanted to do or things like that. It was quite complicated. But Olivia, who's our mentor on Cultivator, knows Chris, who runs Porthmere. And so she just happened to drop him an email to see if there's any space to apply for the residency there. And they gave us a 2-month residency from November till December, which was the first time since uni we'd actually like worked together in the studio. And it was really interesting and also amazing space with the view of the sea, and it's absolutely beautiful. But it's
it was just a good opportunity to get into a space together and like properly just make work where we'd not really had that much since finishing uni, which was kind of in March, so we first had to start working from home with uni. So that was really special to actually have a space to do all that in and to meet some great artists and all of that, which we were able to then have an open studio at the end right before this 3rd lockdown happened. We've been quite lucky with some of the COVID restrictions that we've managed to.
We've kind of sort of
just dodged them.
it's literally just dodged them. Like meeting artists and stuff has always been in the times where we were kind of allowed to go out and meet people, and then the open studio was just before this lockdown, so it's kind of worked out quite well. But yeah, the Porthmeor, there's like limit on like stone carving and stuff for me with Porthmeor, so I had to kind of, it was like sort of adapting your work, wasn't it? Because we didn't have a workshop there, it was just the room with the 4 of us in. But it was a really good experience and a cool opportunity. So. Little bit about us individually. Seeing as the other girls aren't here, they've kind of given us a little bit of snippet of their work. So Helena works with loads of different materials, to be honest. She paints, draws, weaves, sews, makes sculptures. So her work is kind of based around one sort of subject, but then she uses 1,000,001 different materials. So a lot is about sort of organic, natural forms in the environment, a lot of roots and plants and a lot of things like that. But yeah, her work is really
very much rooted in like drawing and woven drawing, but in a kind of sculptural way, in that relationship between drawing and sculpture, which we've all sort of got part of that in our practice, really.
Yeah.
And then Amberly, also very sculptural, but mostly loves working with cement and quite industrial sort of architectural material, and then the sort of contrast and relationship with more natural forms. So on the bottom right is a granite sculpture she's made at the quarry, actually, with to sort of show that relationship there of some natural and then more harsh lines, and a strong interest in tactility and sort of sense of touch a lot more than other senses, really, and looked into Braille in the past before. And then my practice is quite rooted around quarry landscapes and quarries. I've got a bit of a thing for that, which really works well with the studio being based in a quarry, and just the kind of forms and accidental sculpture that is within carved out landscapes. To me, I just sort of see it as like huge sculpture, which sort of tend to try and recreate and work from, with initially drawing and painting, trying to use natural pigments, finding them on location, and then taking those into 3-dimensional sculptures. And then
I've been working mostly with stone since finishing uni, but I've also added some paintings in because of being quite restricted on what I can do. Limestone, which I mainly use, is really hard to get hold of, and I'm not a huge fan of granite carving as much, so I've been sort of scarcely carving just to save the amount of stone that I have. So I've been kind of doing paintings to sort of fill in that gap. But yeah, my work kind of keeps connecting between organic forms and the environment and the human body. And so it's a lot about being inspired by sort of the natural form of rocks and granite and different sort of sculptural elements in a landscape, while also reflecting that in the human form and kind of abstracting the human form and becoming a blur between the two. So it's really just about the form for me more than anything, rather than presenting a human form or being really figurative. I've kind of been sort of towards the end of uni sort of more inspired by Greek mythology and changing genders and degendering the human form. Yeah, and my dissertation was kind of about the subverting social discourses and issues surrounding gender and yeah, that kind of thing. But yeah, I've just been kind of playing with those materials at the moment and using the space that I have, and yeah, excited to get up to the quarry so I can do a lot more carving and just really get into what I'm doing. We've also linked all our Instagrams and stuff like that on each page if you want to go check it out.
And then a common connection, a common thread between all of our works, sort of land and place, and this kind of collaboration, whether it's physical in work or just our ideas and work bouncing off each other while we're in shared studio, which we got a little taste of both at uni and then in Porthmeor. And we've, in all our kind of meeting the field, have had a lot of time to be planning for the future and got very excited with what we want to do with the space at the Quarry. That we want to try and work with recent graduates and uni students for residency opportunities at the space, and just to kind of build a bit of community.
I want like an immersive experience for people to come, and I don't know, it's such like a unique place to be, and I think we kind of want to let other people experience that, and having that building with the amount of space we've got is kind of a no-brainer really to get people to come. And also, as working as a collective, it's also nice just to keep bringing people in, and just, I don't know, there's a real sense of community, and we want to create that
sort of studio culture and like kind of relationship between lots of different artists with similar interests. And then we'll be hoping to have some workshops and things like that to share our own skills and skills that we want to learn from, kind of based in the Quarry, and other artists who can share things with those who are interested.
And we've kind of been sort of, I mean, the focus on meeting artists and really like connecting with people, it kind of helps being in Cornwall because you've got quite a small space, and you don't have to travel very far to meet people. And like, we just before our Porthmeor residency, we met Richard Long, the famous sculptor, just because he was in the same studio as us at Porthmeor the previous month for his residency. And so it kind of makes it feel like a really small world when you bump into people like that. But we just want to keep going with those artist conversations, and I think bringing people into the studio to do residencies and things like that will help with that, I don't know, continuing conversation. And our work really, for some reason, just works really well together, even though it doesn't necessarily have a really strong connection. It's kind of the fact that we don't have a strong connection between all our work, but it does work together on a whole with the organic forms that that kind of makes us work as a collective. We're hoping that we can start running workshops like once we're in there, based on like different sort of selective pieces of our, I don't know, practices, I guess. We'd love to do some carving workshops and some printing, and and we're hoping to get some more. We've got a potter's wheel we really want to kiln, some silk screens we should be getting soon. We're really just going to make it like a full.
We're all very like multimedia and like not very settled on one particular technique, so
I guess that's kind of what like that, really holds us together. Like we have that kind of, we all work with our individual subjects, and then we work with 100 different like materials within that, but we all kind of have a similar sort of subject matter.
Something sculptural.
And that's it for the presentation. But I guess we could talk more about get back on Teams. Hang on, how do I stop sharing? I guess we could talk more about kind of sort of building a collective and, I don't know, gaining traction with it a little bit, because we seem to have, I don't know, just met so many people and done so many things in a really short space of time. And I think that is a lot also down to like having mentors, and like we've already mentioned David, but David is just a huge part of what we're doing, and we're always meeting up with him and collaborating and things like that. And Cultivator also, if anyone wants to find more out about it, they have a website online, and they're always kind of doing sort of grants and stuff that they give away. But you don't just get a grant. Along with getting a grant, you also get mentors, you get you can go on finance lectures, like they do pretty much everything. And going along with that, you get an individual one-to-one mentor like every couple of weeks, really, to talk through your practice, like literally anything you want to talk about, they will kind of sit with you and talk about that. But
they're super helpful post uni.
Really helpful, aren't they? It kind of makes you feel not as lost. Like I feel like when you finish uni, having that there, you've got sort of an aim, whereas if you just kind of finish uni straight away going into your own practice, it's probably not always like, quite nerve-wracking. It's just there to open up.
Sorry to interrupt, guys, but I think your camera got switched off in the transition to screen sharing and back again. Awesome.
Sorry.
I feel like that's our kind
of presentation.
If anyone wants to say anything else, or...
I think it'd be nice to talk about a combination of obviously after universities we've sort of spoken a lot about, and you know, that transition, but also I think it would be lovely to speak about that significance of place and space and the materiality of your work. And I mean, you said that you kind of feel like your practice doesn't necessarily maybe relate, or there isn't that clear kind of relationship between them. But I think from my perspective, definitely, and I don't know whether you agree with me or whether anyone else will, but it definitely feels like that sense of place and the land is really joining your practice together, and that's really integral to what you are as individuals and as a collective. And please elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's nice to hear that, because sometimes I feel like we look at our work and we're like, how does this kind of relate to each other? So it's nice to hear that. But yeah, I think with the organic sort of elements of our work, we are all kind of grounded in the environment. So I think, especially with the studio, there was a need to be surrounded by environment, not just in a studio block with loads of white cubes and in like a little window to look out of. I think, and
there's a lot of our meetings and talks with each other and with David and other artists have happened outside on walks, and partly because of COVID, but just in general, I think that would have happened anyway, that we can just immerse ourselves within a landscape, and always like, you know, finding random bits like rocks and formations and things to then sort of have a little mini collaborations while we're out on a walk, which is such a key part of our practice, of like being within the landscape and making work based on that.
And I guess like I don't really think when we go out on walks, I'm not sure if like the actual landscape is really inspiring the shape of my work as much, but I think the actual I don't know, the actual going on a walk and taking that time to like think about it and talk with other people and being outside is just generally really inspiring. And and I think that kind of is what ties us together. It's less of like a physical thing and more of like an experience that ties what we're doing together. And I think
and it's like love of just material in its own form, just whatever it is, of a like sculpture that is more about its materiality than the forms or what it might represent, something.
We've got a lot of like random rocks and things to fill the studio with when we're fully moved in. We've got plenty of shelves to like fill things, but we're really it's just material is a big thing, isn't it, really?
Material and like landscape or place.
Because our Fish Factory show was called Sculptili Materiales Conceptu, which is French for Latin, I think, Latin for sculpture, materials and concepts. And I kind of wanted to base it around materials mainly, but bringing in other people and how they sort of make material change the way we look at art and how something becomes something else. So one girl that was in it called Emily, who's not in our collective anymore, but she's still a friend, she created kind of sculptural canvases. So they were like paintings, but they kind of became sculptures. And I think that was like a really interesting variation and made us think about this kind of middle ground between us making sculptures and us painting. And I don't know, I feel like for me, my work kind of is a constant cycle where each thing inspires the other. So the sculpture, I don't necessarily start with one thing first. The sculpture kind of inspires the paintings, and the paintings inspires the sculpture and the prints and all that kind of thing. But
I think we all feel a little bit like that with all of our practices. They're kind of sculptural at their heart, but they're not always three-dimensional.
There's not like one thing anchoring it. Kind of like loads of little different things. And Helena kind of works loads with sort of drawing. That's her main focus, but she's got such a huge variation of work. And she talks really beautifully about her work as well. It's a shame she's not here to chat about it, but she's really into the organic forms, and I'd say out of all of us, she's more into the organic forms and the kind of not, I guess you're more landscape, but Helena's more like roots and growth and organic and plants and things like that. And she uses quite a lot of organic materials, where we kind of sort of delve into the more man-made as well, just to kind of create things. But and
I think for all of us as well, like I'd love to hear more about the kind of project that is renovating and transforming this house and this space as well, because I feel like, again, from my perspective, it feels like a collective project. It feels almost like you're creating I mean, the most perfect space for you and the most perfect space for your art, and almost could take on a kind of art form. I mean, that could be presumptuous, but the way that's informing your practice as well, I'm sure that's integral to kind of your collective. And yeah, it would be lovely to hear more about that.
Yeah, that feels like a good way of describing it. I think it feels like a collaborative project, the actual renovating of the studio, because we've had quite a blank canvas with it and been able to just strip everything away and build it how we want it to be. We've got lots of ideas for how we want sort of a room for more like workshops and communal gatherings and things like that, and lots of different project spaces. So
it's kind of been quite fulfilling doing it. It's almost like, I don't know, because I haven't done a lot towards my practice in the last like month or so because it's been quite busy, but just doing that is like fulfilling enough because it's quite exciting, and and seeing it transform and kind of planning out how we're going to work in the space, because it's quite an unusual shaped space, because it is sort of a rectangle, but then the two front bits are smaller rooms, so you've got kind of a weird sort of small thin bit either side and then a big bit in the middle. So it's going to be interesting once it's finished how we're going to like set everything out, and whether we're going to be like sat close together or spaced apart. And I think that'll make a huge difference how the space works. So it's going to be good to kind of see how that works once we're actually in there.
It feels good to be doing something quite physical as well. It feels like quite manual work, where I haven't done so much of the carving aspect of my practice over the last few months to like get into just like painting and like stripping paint off and like planing down doors feels really like fulfilling and really good.
And also it's such like a, I don't know, you see a lot of change in a small period of time. Like even just painting a little bit of it white now that we've kind of got to that part, and getting the doors to lock yesterday was a huge thing. And so now it feels like we're only a small time away from actually being able to move in. And it's been over a year since we first were showed the place and was like, you can have this, just because of COVID. So it's been a long time coming. So we've been quite patient to wait all this time. But
that's made us more excited for it to actually happen.
It has, and having Porthmere in between really helped, and was also a little taster for how we're going to work together in a studio, which is kind of integral to how we work as a collective. Like we need to know we can work together in a studio and not be kind of on top of each other, or which was really good. And Porthmere is quite a small space, like Studio 9 in Porthmere, which is the residency studio, is quite a small space for 4 people. It's mainly always like the one person in there. So I think we've kind of adapted to working in smaller spaces, and
allows the work to kind of speak to each other a bit more and kind of get a bit of a conversation going with it all.
I feel like a lot of people said when they came to the open studio that you couldn't really see, like it's hard to tell whose was what, because sometimes it kind of like intertwined in the middle, and quite similar materials, and it was really good at Porthmere. And
and I guess being in that small space, you're constantly having the conversation with each other and constantly sharing those ideas, aren't you? So I mean, I think I'm really fascinated by that significance of the space and the place, as well as each other, of course, and how that all kind of marries together, and how I mean, you've spoken about creating community, but there's a real sense between you all that there's this sense of community, which you've built very successfully. And I'm just really fascinated about that kind of rejuvenating space and that using space to inform your practice as well.
And I think that continuing conversation is what you need. I think when you finish uni,
it's easy to feel quite isolated. And I've been so glad that we've had our collective for just general support when things have been difficult or we've not had a space to work in. There's just other people there in the studio to like even just give you an informal little crit about your work when you
because you lose that when you finish uni, you lose that sense of group and communication and like giving a little critique. And I always used to gain so much from having those little group critiques at uni that I think it's good to still have that. And it's nice. So it really works as a group, and place is like a huge part, just because of, I don't know, we all moved down to Cornwall from elsewhere in the UK, and to then absolutely love the place and want to stay. And it's become a huge part of our work. It kind of sense that we quite a historical little part of Cornwall and
Cornish
Maine.
heritage.
Yes,
Quarrying and
yeah.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah, because that quarry has been around for a very long time. Tim Marsh, who currently owns it, I think was passed on to him through the last person that owned it when he passed away. But it's been there for a very, very long time. And yeah, so it's a real integral part of that kind of surrounding area, and once obviously was part of kind of how people lived and different miners that lived there and quarry people, and yeah, so it's really grounding.
Yeah, and I think it'd be nice to hear. I mean, Kat, you've spoken about sort of your practice and that quarried landscape and how you've put it so beautifully that you kind of see it as a huge sculpture. And I mean, for both of you, but maybe specifically more you, how the history of that place and the kind of permanence as well of that place is informing your work and your practice and you as a collective as a whole as well.
Yeah. I sort of wrote, part of my dissertation was about that kind of theme, I guess, of the excavated spaces and that kind of negative space of material not being there. And it sort of feels like it's filled with that energy of it being excavated and that kind of history, which ties in a lot with the heritage and the fact that it's still a working quarry. So it feels a bit like quite an energetic sculpture within the excavated space.
I guess your sculptures were from the quarry in Wales, wasn't it?
Yeah, the image that was on the presentation was the work I was doing at Porthmeor, based on a visit to North Wales to slate quarries there, where there's just piles and piles of slate that you could just walk through while there was like diggers scraping it all down, and it made you feel like really, really small. And I don't know what it is, I just had this weird attraction to spaces like that. And there's some like carved out bits that would just literally look like sculpture, and I just had this urge to make them into something sculptural. So
it's quite interesting with the slate and the granite and they're quite hard raw materials, aren't they?
Yeah, and just started kind of painting from that with some of the slate that I got from the location there, and then end up carving at the end of the residency to kind of mimic that.
I guess we kind of uncover what's underneath the ground almost, because like Helena looks at roots, and the limestone that I carve into has been quarried from Portland, which was once under the sea, and so the stone has been formed under the sea like tens of thousands of years ago. So what I break away has not been seen for tens of thousands of years.
There's like bits of shells in there, like fossilized.
Yeah, they like stick out little bits, and then your connection to the digging into places and excavating, and we kind of uncover what's underneath and what's hidden in the earth, almost in a very, that sounds very philosophical and deep, but we kind of all,
even,
I guess,
Amberley's stuff of maybe things that you can't see so much, like haptic tactility of things and sort of quite subtle combinations of architecture and landscape.
Yeah, and I guess kind of following on from that experience of the landscape and the space that you're talking about a lot, I guess we spoke about a lot this morning in our second portfolio presentation about this human relationship that we have with the land, and I guess I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts about that relationship that humanity has with the land, and maybe what you think of it at the moment, how you think maybe it could change, or the way we treat the land as well, and how that might reflect also into your practice as individuals and as a collective.
Yeah, it feels like kind of innate relationship and stuff with the land. I think you just within a landscape, even the quarry, which is quite man-made and industrial, like working like hard materials, it feels like something just, I don't know, some sort of strong connection they've got with like the body and landscape, and these like very bodily processes, even of like carving, it's just affects the body a lot. So.
And I guess being quite interested in the organic and natural element, we kind of automatically kind of more sustainable as a group, because we tend to try and use more natural materials if we can. So that kind of makes us I don't know, more connected to the environment. It's kind of a sensitive subject at the moment, I guess, isn't it? That kind of relationship between us and the environment, and like how we're, I don't know, using it. And because the quarry, I think, is just a really interesting thing to touch on with that, because you're thinking about something, like you said, that is man-made, and we've kind of dug into this ground to uncover this stuff to use, but in a way that's much better creating houses out of granite blocks than it is firing bricks or making them out of these really horrible man-made kind of like blocks and
steel. And
and it's kind of interesting to have that sort of community of houses and land built from what was underground in that area. And it doesn't require any sort of industrial creating, like you don't have to fire anything or be made in a factory, or it's kind of all there on the site and just taken out and built in that place.
It feels very relevant to like place with it, seeing like granite quarries. There's quite a lot of local granite quarries, and then especially Penryn, just all the buildings and houses are made of granite. It feels like it's
quite interesting
where you can literally see where it's come from.
And especially in Maid as well, like a lot of places are granite buildings, and so you can literally see it's just taken straight out the ground and carved. And it's all at the quarry. They only have probably like 2 saws, which are only used if there's like huge rocks. Most of it is done by hand by a group of about like 10 sort of carvers there, and make bricks still for houses. Actually, they're called coins, but they're still made and put into Cornish houses and things. So it's still very much like a lost trade, but it's still happening in Cornwall.
Keeping this like, key part of the heritage going. In landscape.
It's quite interesting.
And I think also what you've spoken about, there feels a very strong relationship with the land there. And even though the quarry, I mean, it feels from my perspective of, quarries, that it's very industrialized land, but even just the way you talk about it, it doesn't seem like that. It's a very personal relationship with the land for you both, and all of you as a collective, but also the people that are working the land there and the space surrounding it, that it's almost weirdly in tune with the land. Although this land is sort of, and this rock is being harvested, there is that kind of working in tandem with that land as well, and that understanding of the land. And I really just find that quite fascinating, that outlook on a land that is perceived as quite industrial as well.
And there's nothing harsh once you've kind of taken it out. There's nothing harsh going back in the land, so it's not like you're replacing that with some awful chemicals or anything like that. Nothing's being processed in any way which affects the environment. And so it feels kind of nice to be in that space where it's all quite organic, and there's no like huge machinery, or there's no like huge consumption of power, because it is just guys using their hands kind of carving with tools. And it's probably quite sustainable as a company, because they're not really using a huge amount of electric, and what they do use is usually on like little generators. And so it's kind of it's really nice to be in that kind of space. And I don't know, being in Cornwall as well, and like mostly the land being undeveloped, you're still quite in a rural place, and for it to be so small and to still have like, I think it's like 90% of Cornwall is like undeveloped, it's, I don't know, it's just a really nice and inspiring environment and landscape to be in, compared to like where we're probably from originally, like Nottingham and like more the West Midlands and things like that are all quite built up places. So I think that's why we've stayed down here, and it's a lot more, I don't know, more forward thinking and environmentally friendly down here as well, with the way they recycle and the use of like a lot of paper instead of plastic. And
and you could just tell like that is such a unique and special place for all of you, and that experience of that place on a whole, like whether that's just the individual quarry space or the Cornwall as a whole, it's so unique and special. And I think just before I hand over to some questions from everyone else, so please send us some questions on Instagram or in the Teams chat. It would just be really lovely to hear you both talk a little bit more about your practice in both ways. So please take the floor and just talk about it a little bit more. Would be lovely.
Okay. yeah, my practice kind of started. I've always had a real kind of affinity with the human form. And I guess at college I was still doing it, but when I came to uni, I really wanted to try and branch out and do something a lot different. So I started with photography and kind of manipulating photos and looking at nostalgia and that kind of thing. But in fact, actually in second year, when I had David as my tutor, who is now still our mentor, he kind of inspired me to get into sculpture. And at first I was just purely working with materials and playing with them and not really creating any like specific form or being inspired by any specific shape. I was just letting the material do the thing and kind of going with it. But then we did a workshop to make apples out of limestone, like a carving workshop, which was really like just really fun to kind of let loose and not have to do something that's really specific to your subject. And from then I just loved the material, and that kind of took me on that kind of journey of it. And the human form kind of wormed its way back into my work, and yeah, I really liked that. I looked a lot in my dissertation about different representations of the human form. So one particular piece I looked at was Brancosi's Princess X, which he created in like the early 1900s, I think. I'd have to check that. But it was kind of in a time where in France women were still sort of protesting for their right to vote, and it was a very tense time. And the sculpture itself is of Napoleon Bonaparte's great niece or great granddaughter, something like that. So it is of a woman, but it's not named, and it's quite a phallic shape. And so it's this idea that women are being oppressed by this phallic, male-dominated society, and they're really still wanting the vote and wanting to be equal. And it's really interesting that he named it Princess X, because at the time he did X to create this almost non-gendered idea of the person. So the sculpture became non-gendered through its use of being subject matter being female, but also relating to this really phallic male-dominated society. And now X has become like the non-binary sort of letter for us now in modern 21st century. So it's quite an interesting link, and that's what started it all, really, with my human form and degendering the human subject and trying to create this emphasis on shape and how beautiful the human body can be, whether male, female, or other, like just really focusing on the form itself rather than what it means to be gendered or that kind of thing. So yeah, that's really where it all started. So it's a very modern look at the work with very traditional materials and techniques and that kind of thing. So yeah, that was a little sum up of what I'm doing. But
yeah, it sounds absolutely wonderful, and it's that interesting relationship between something that is, you know, at a tense time in history where, you know, people are fighting for their rights, and obviously rightfully so, and you know, it's such a difficult time, and then for that to become translated into our history now and the life that we're living, I think it's such a beautiful connection. And yeah,
sort of a tense time at the moment. I feel like there's still relevant, like very much relevant with everything that's going on at the moment and everything that has been going on the last few years. Like it's a continuing subject that we really have to talk about and be more open about, I think, and being more just open-minded. I feel like a lot of the world still has a lot of learning and growing to do to be open-minded about all that kind of stuff. But yeah,
and then coming back as well from, you know, this your degendered forms, and just really focusing in on the human body, and then obviously coming back to the space and the place and how those translate in tandem with each other and converse with each other. It's very beautiful to see that kind of relationship with our human forms coming into play much more with space than I think we generally see in our lives. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. And
yeah, but it's kind of most of my compositions come from that sort of body in space, and so it's quite abstract and focused on the figure and form, and that contrast between the negative space and the positive space, and where I carve and where I don't carve. And I don't know, I think the connection to space and place as well for me is carving into that stone. And oftentimes I won't start carving. I'll do something called direct carving rather than planning, which is something Barbara Hepworth did a lot, where you'll just go into it and not have any sketches or references or anything, and kind of just let the stone sort of talk to you and take you into the carving. And so I'll just kind of start chipping away a little bit, and then I'll look at it, and then I'll just get this idea of something else, and I kind of just let the material do the talking almost, with these also having in my memory like the shapes and stuff that I have created obviously inform my sculptures, because then there is a link between the shapes that I create and my sculptures. But having that sculpture and material talk to you first and just kind of going with it is like really interesting. And I think that's more my connection to sort of the place and the land and that kind of thing, and history. And yeah,
I mean, it feels very intuitive from what you're saying, and how, I guess, it is that conversation with the material itself, and also how that material maybe wants to move and flow and show itself, because I'm sure there's, you know, areas of the material where it's very hard to sort of carve, and others where it's very easy to carve. And it's also like, I mean, not necessarily imposing, but that kind of, you know, putting in your vision onto something, but letting that also direct you is I'm sure, a very wonderful experience with the work as well.
it is, yeah.
Yeah, and then that was lovely to hear more about your practice. And Kat, if you would like to say anything more about your practice, that would be lovely as well, just a sort of summary too.
I don't know. I feel like it's always just been kind of quite rooted in both sculpture and plays, that I've kind of already said, but like throughout uni had been using a lot of pigments found on location for more painterly type works, which has kind of crept back in a lot more with my work at Porthmere using the slate from Wales. So I found that a really key way to signify place without it being literally like labelled on there. You don't really know unless you were told that that's what it was made of. And then how that kind of plays into a bit of sculpture. It's a bit more of a tactile way of working. And then I've just always found myself returning to sculpture or carving or something, particularly at Porthmere when I'd just been drawing and painting for a month or two and just needed to like do something very physical and like chip away material, which
I feel like we all have that need after a while. Like we all kind of do drawing for a little bit, and then we're like, oh my god, we really need to like start carving or like sculpting or really like using our hands a bit more.
Yeah, and I feel like process is very important to me, and it kind of, my process of carving and working sort of mimics my subject matter of quarrying, of like carving out material. And especially a lot of my carving pieces are like negative space sculpture, so I sort of carve into it and like make a void within some stone or whatever, plaster or something. It's that, also that kind of thing of negative space being a big part of it, which is I think then what led into Quarry's. So I did some work a couple of years ago about sound sort of being able to inhabit a space, and that like intangible something becoming something quite material. So shaped and sculpted small bits of found clay to the sounds of a landscape, and then cast those sculptures in blocks of plaster and like scooped out the clay, and then what was left was the shape and form of that sound, kind of, and sort of strange translation of that, which has been something that's kind of stuck throughout my work a little bit, and that like holding like mass of what is typically not really there. That makes a bit of sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. It's a similar kind of, I think Rachel Whiteread does a similar kind of thing with space, where it's the space in between, and it's such a fascinating relationship, isn't it?
Did you write about her in your dissertation?
I didn't actually.
Did you? No, I thought you did, but yeah.
No, it's
that's just a name that came into my head by chance.
Yeah, she's a really interesting artist, and it's that kind of idea of something that it would be seen to be kind of empty within a form, but it's actually filled with kind of this process and energy of like carving and documents of time within the rocks that you can sort of see in the side of a quarry or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's filled with sound or waves or whatever energy, as you say.
Yeah.
There's something always filling it, isn't there? Even though you can't necessarily see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just been trying to like name that, or like find a way of like describing that and making that sort of understandable for the last couple of years, basically, but without that being the key part of my work. I think that's underlying what's been there.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds so wonderful. And I think Jasper, if Jasper wants to come online, has put a small comment into the Teams chat if he'd like to go through what he's asking or saying. If he's there.
Yeah, I can do. I don't know if you guys can see that question I put there, just about the collaborative kind of aspect. Sorry, I think my computer fan might also be like going insane. Yeah, I'm just curious about what the sort of process of like you guys interacting with each other as artists is like. Like, do you go as far as organising sort of formal crits, or is it more like commenting more informally, just as you kind of coexist in that space on what each person's making?
Yeah, it's quite organic, I think, compared to what is kind of stereotypical collective would be. You might think of a group of artists who their practice is one practice and they all collaborate always together. We've got quite individual practices that we just like having the shared space of where our work can have a conversation and bounce off each other's.
To like
I like that phrase, like coexisting.
I feel like we do coexist more than collaborate, in terms of not in a negative way, but just in a way that we don't always naturally go towards making work together, because we're all quite individual in how we work as well. And I think there are plans to make something together.
Yeah,
it would be quite interesting.
We'd love to do that in the once we get into our Quarry studio to like more formally make a piece together.
Yeah, but not necessarily
like miniature collaborations. Even just something intangible.
Like there might not necessarily be one
yeah
like finished piece. It might be that we kind of each react to a certain thing and make work off that, and that be collaborative.
And like sort of feedback and crit wise kind of found like at Porthmere, when myself was just feeling a little bit lost at one point and didn't know what to do, so kind of showed my work to the others and was just like, please just give me some feedback, just tell me whatever you think, tell me if it's like shit or if it's good or whatever. And I think I just sort of missed that a bit from uni, where you get constant feedback. So it's quite an informal thing of if we feel like we want some feedback and ask for that, or
works quite well.
And I guess it's also that like collaboration and conversation, and as Jasper has said, that kind of coexisting. It's almost like a collaboration itself, even though you might not feel it all the time, or you might not be talking and making things together. There is that collaboration and just being together, if that makes sense.
And I think there's a definite development and change in our work from doing that, like being inspired by each other and seeing materials we each use. I think our work has changed a lot just by like being in a same space and just working together. I think that's made a huge difference. I think personally I've seen I've used more organic materials, and I've sort of come away from colour a bit more, which is funny because none of you guys use colour that much, like significantly, and I think I've kind of been inspired by that and gone down a more natural, organic looking route, as well as the organic in the materials itself. But that's definitely inspired me, so I think my work's changed a lot from that.
It's just that kind of subconscious, like unsaid kind of development, isn't it, that you all go through, and just I guess also the way your minds are all working and what you're all thinking at the time, and the conversations you all are dying to have, and the way that translates for each of you in your own practice too. So,
and I think becoming a collective is a really organic thing. I don't think you should ever force it. I don't know, we never I don't think we actually ever said let's be a collective. It just kind of happened because we had a space and we were like, do you want to come work in space, shall we all go together? We never really said we're going to be a collective until like we'd done all this like exhibition and had a space and stuff like that already. And I think if you try and force something because you have similar work, I don't know if it'll work as well. You've kind of got to have that spark and energy between you to be able to do it.
Accidental, organic. It's just sort of formed.
I've a couple people coming out of uni I knew did like little mini sort of collectives just based on like their work, but I've noticed they've kind of faded out a bit more, and I think it's because it was more like, right, we need to do something, let's find a group of people.
It's not just the work, it's all the people and like
Yeah.
the general just collaboration we've got through just talking and all that.
Yeah.
It's being like friends outside of it, like it's not just a business and a work for us. It's like we are a group of really close friends, and we weren't before being a collective. Like I didn't know Kat or Helena at all really at uni until our last year, and then we didn't really talk until we did like the Fish Factory show really that much. So we have only really been like really close friends for a little over a year. And I think it's just really organic, and I don't think forcing anything works as well.
Yeah, I think I completely second that. I mean, with Isaiah and Jasper here too, who obviously we all co-collaborate to sort of make this event happen as well, and some of the past things we've done. It's not necessarily, as you say, that our work is the same or that we all are interested in the same things. It's just that sort of like-mindedness, I think it comes down to, and that kind of drive to want to make something. And this symposium has come out of, I mean, partly my dissertation and what I wrote about, and then also kind of where Isaiah, Jasper and I have sort of taken those ideas and formed it with some of the second years, third years, and of course inviting you guys down. So yeah, I completely second that from our point of view as well. But yeah, I think it'd be lovely to hear from Isaiah, Jasper, and anyone else if they have any other questions or comments they'd love to share. But I'll throw Isaiah and Jasper in there first.
I think after hearing Kat describe like her practice, it reminds me of the conversation we had with Alexander Morin yesterday, speaking about this Japanese philosophy that has kind of like informed him. I think it's called Ma. So it's basically not a celebration, but it's a celebration of things that are not things. So it's more about the space between them. You get what I mean? It's quite integral to how the Japanese build the architecture, or like how they do the flower arrangement. So it's not so much about the flowers, but it's about like the things around them. But yeah, I don't know. But I think sorry.
How do you spell the Japanese word?
I think it's just M-A.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
But I think if you Google like Ma Japanese philosophy, if you want to be extra savvy and just type in negative space, it should come out.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. That kind of is similar to what we're doing in terms of being a collective, but more about the environment rather than us as a group.
Yeah, exactly. And it also reminds me of I'm not sure if you know what feng shui is.
Yeah.
So it's a part like pseudo-sciencey kind of like Chinese look on the environment as well. I mean, my mom is a fervent believer. I'm just like, what? And then but yeah, I think over the symposium we've kind of discussed and focused quite a bit about the poetics of the landscape, and this morning we've been talking about the politics and the lived histories in like materials. So I'm just wondering, being situated in Cornwall, and Cornwall being its geology is such a unique thing in Cornwall, and it plays like so much, and it plays up so much in its history. I'm not sure if like any of Cornwall's like heritage has kind of like continued to like inform your practice.
I guess so. I think it's more, I don't know if it's informed it visually, like obviously. I think it's more just being in the space that's kind of inspired me more and motivated me more. Less of like the place itself being visible in my work. I guess.
Yeah, I find like the subtleties, and again that what you reference of the things of something that's around it and not there. A part of that, especially with quarries and the material that's not there as opposed to what is there.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting.
Yeah. And yeah, it'd be nice to hear if anyone else has any comments or questions. If Jasper, you have anything else you'd like to say. I feel like I've spoken so much that I want to give everyone else the possible opportunity to ask you anything or say anything that they want to. But yeah, I mean, as we sort of said, it's just that integral, unique and special like relationship that you have with the land that feels so personal, feels so intuitive and subconscious. It's not that land is doing necessarily something for you, it's what you can gain from the land and that appreciation of the land around you as well. And I really do think that is very, very beautiful, really do.
Thank you. Yeah, and if anyone like ever wants any information about things like cultivator and just like starting and finding a place to rent, and like we've been through so many applications for things from starting to now. So like we've got our Instagram at quarryhouse_collective. If anyone wants to ask any questions, you can drop us a message. But yeah, cultivator is quite a complicated process. It's a long application. And then also finding spaces, like just finding the right landlords and landladies that are happy with us doing what we want and that kind of thing.
And a lot of it is more like word of mouth and like who you kind of talk to and know through friends and other artists. Because a lot of spaces that are more informal are not found on like studio finders and stuff like that. So yeah, it's always worth talking to people.
Always.
We always can try and help wherever possible as well, whatever we know of. And
Well, lovely. Thank you so much. Isaiah, I know Isaiah's keeping track of the Instagram, so we'll hand over to you if there's anything.
There's nothing on Instagram, no questions as of yet on there.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think unless Isaiah or Jasper have anything they'd like to ask, or anyone else here, of course, unless you two would love to share anything else, I think we're coming to the end.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for hosting us and having us.
Thank you for coming, being on our symposium. I think it's been lovely.
Yes, thank you. Definitely don't thank us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
super
and
grateful. Thank you, guys.
Have a lot more updates on our Instagram and stuff. And once we're in the studio as well, everyone can come visit. And hopefully we'll have a bit of like a mini exhibition and little open studio and all that kind of thing. So yeah,
that would be wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I'll just wrap up with a bit of our nod to tomorrow, which is the final day of our symposium. So Torren and Toby are speaking tomorrow morning, I think, in the portfolio presentation, our third portfolio presentation, which will then be followed by Shona and Alistair, which is our final portfolio presentation, and they'll be talking about the digital and the VR and AI, which will beautifully lead into, I don't know if you two know much about NFTs and cryptocurrency and so on, but that will be a talk by Clara. Yeah, I'm sort of very frazzled around it, very sort of limited knowledge, but she speaks so beautifully on all of it, and it should be a really nice talk to go to, and I think she's going to do quite a sort of foundational background to what NFTs actually are, and kind of why they're important and what they could lead to. So that should be really fun. And then finally, the most exciting sort of talk we'll be having is from Jem Southam to wrap up our symposium and really finish on that kind of grounding, I think, in our earthy landscape as well, as we sort of merge closer in the digital. But for now, thank you so much, both of you. It has been so lovely talking to you both, and that's it really.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Lovely.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Have a lovely day. Bye.